This weekend in the Gospels, Jesus performs another miracle. So we're used to this. He's always performing miracles. This weekend, though, he performs it in a particular place. He performs it outside of Israel. So Israel at that time, the nation of Israel, the people who were descendants of Abraham, lived essentially in the north. There was a whole region where they lived, primarily like to the west of the Sea of Galilee, between the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea. And then there was kind of a break in the middle where the Samaritans lived in Samaria. And then down south is another place where all the Israelites lived, in Jerusalem and Bethlehem and in the Negev desert and all this stuff. And then a little bit kind of along the Jordan River that runs. But to the east, it was all foreigners. It was all other people. And that's where he goes today. He goes to the Decapolis, it's called, on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, where Greek-speaking peoples lived. And it was maybe a whole conglomerate of different ethnicities and stuff, some actual Greek peoples, but probably tons of Greek culture. So people worshiping the gods and goddesses of ancient Greece, not worshiping the God of Abraham and of the Israelites, not worshiping Yahweh. And Jesus going there would have been a huge thing for his followers. Like, it would have sort of blown their minds. Because the Messiah wasn't supposed to go to anyone other than, the Messiah is the fulfillment of the promises made to Abraham about Abraham's family. And so this idea that the Messiah would go elsewhere was kind of a mind-blowing thing. Now for you and me, it doesn't quite have that same effect, because we're sitting here in Minot, North Dakota in 2021, and we're sitting in the pew and we're like, why is that so surprising? That God, the Word incarnate, God himself, could go to any place on earth and perform a miracle. Like, he's God. So of course he can do that. He could do it in Jerusalem if he wanted to. He could do it in the Decapolis if he wanted to. Or in Paris, or in Boston, or in Minot, or whatever. There's no limits, obviously, on God's power. Why is that such a big deal? And yet, I think if you and I sit and reflect, more than likely, we actually can find that we relate to them more than we maybe think right away. That more than likely, in your life and in my life, there are places where we have sort of resigned ourselves to thinking, this will never change. So something that, maybe it's something too big to ever be any different. Something I've done in my life, some sin I committed in the past or whatever. And the repercussions of that are still felt. And without even realizing it, I've sort of resigned myself to the thought of, that is always going to be bad. It's always going to be broken. Or it's something that someone else did to me that was significant. And that thing is always there, and I've sort of, without even intentionally doing it, I've sort of just resigned myself to this idea that is always going to be a stain and a broken thing in my life. Or some personal attribute that I don't like about myself. I guess it's just the way it is. Life will always be hard there. Or some sin that I keep falling back into. I feel like I get out of it, and then I fall back into it again. And then I get better again, and I like how I am, and then I fall back into it. And this has happened so many times that I've just resigned myself to thinking, that's just the way things are. Well, this morning, we need to take note of those things and recognize that if I've fallen into that line of thinking, that needs to be rejected because it is a lie. That if I've fallen into that way of thinking, I'm literally doing what all the Israelites were doing at that time, thinking, well, no, that's impossible that the Messiah would go elsewhere. And if I've started to fall into this line of thinking, there's nothing God can do there, then I am, sadly, literally, standing opposed to the gospel, standing opposed to what Jesus wants to do. Because at some point between today and the day when I enter heaven, God willing, we all make it, those things will be gone. In heaven, the old frictions between family members, or the miscommunications, or the rifts that we forgot where they even started, and now they've always been there, but we don't really even know where they're from, those will be gone, necessarily. Because in heaven, there is only trust and goodness and love. And so nothing can be admitted into heaven without that. And so those things will have to be gone for us to get into heaven. And any other sort of like brokenness or whatever will all be wiped away. So at some point between September 5th, 2021, and the day that I enter heaven, or God willing, we all enter heaven, those things will be gone. And so God is going to heal them, either here or somehow in purgatory, but at some point he will have to heal them. He will have to work a miracle, even in the parts in our lives where we think, like they did, the Messiah can't go, or God's power for some reason doesn't work, because it does. And if we're falling into this line of thinking he can't do anything, then we're just kind of as foolish as them, thinking that for some reason God can't do whatever he wants to do and work a miracle in someone's life. This past week, I got back later one night to the rectory after school. I think it was after the volleyball game on Tuesday night. And so I get back later, and Father Nelson and Father Waltz are watching the tail end of Forrest Gump. And I didn't realize this. I walk in and I just announce my presence like I normally do, as all narcissists do. Look at me, And so I walk in and I say I'm here, and it was like the last 10, 15 minutes of the movie, which are a very dramatic part of the movie. And so it was like, it's like what happens when someone barges in the middle of a really, you know what I mean, like a really powerful part of the movie, and they're like, shut up, we're like, this is a really big moment. And so then I sat down and watched the tail end of it, and I hadn't seen it in years, and I was like, wow, this is a really good film. And I was like, well, do you guys mind if we just started at the beginning? I just want to see some of the opening scenes, because it's a funny movie too. And so we started at the beginning, and I stayed up and watched the entire movie, even though it was a school night and I have school the next day. And I just got drawn into it. I'd forgotten how powerful of a movie it is. And I think actually it's a movie about love at its rock bottom, at its core. It's Forrest Gump has some kind of a mental illness or something, but so he's not very intelligent, and he knows this about himself, but he knows how to love. He knows how to remain committed. There's a scene towards the very end of the movie where he and Jenny, the girl that he loves, are talking, and I think he had just proposed to her, and she's like, I can't marry you, Forrest. You don't understand what love is. And he's like, I might not be very smart, Jenny, but I know what love is. And so it's an incredibly powerful film. But anyway, in the film, there's the one character, Lieutenant Dan, probably one of my favorite characters in the movie. And he's a very colorful character, but he's very angry at the world, let's just say. He's angry at the world. He's angry at God. He's not in a good place for the first, majority of the film. And then at some point, he has this sort of dramatic encounter with his own mortality and with God. And then we see him later in the film, and he is a completely different man. Totally softened, and a totally different man. And committed. He had gotten married and settled down and everything. And you might say, well, right, that's Hollywood, it's a made-up movie. But I have seen that before. I haven't talked to the person, so I can't say his name, but someone in my own family who has gone through something like that. And I would say, in terms of the miracles, perhaps, that I've ever been able to witness, And I never would have thought I'd have said this. I'd have thought that like some sort of medical miracle or some sort of physical miracle would be the most profound thing I'd ever seen. And maybe one day it will be, but that is the most profound miracle I've ever seen, that this guy's heart could change. And sadly, I realize in hindsight, I never even prayed for him. I wasn't even praying for him because in a way, I had resigned myself to this idea that this is just who he was. I couldn't even imagine that life could be any different. And then God proved me wrong. God can do whatever he wants. And so this morning, he's inviting you and me to do what he did with every impossible situation in the gospel. Allow him to touch it. The one and only thing we have to do is bring these things to him. Every time he does a miracle in the Gospels, it's because the person comes to him, or some of his buddies bring the person to him, or whatever. But like you somehow get the broken, painful situation to Jesus, and then he touches it and works his miracle. He wants to do the same in our lives in a dramatic way with the things that we have resigned ourselves to thinking he can never change or never will be changed. All we have to do is bring them to him. Jesus, this morning, as you work the most profound miracle of our lives, turning bread and wine into your body and blood, we ask that you increase our faith and our hope. Help it not to be a false faith and hope that is small and weak and pusillanimous, but help it to be a strong and magnanimous faith and hope based in truth, the truth that you can do anything. Help us to bring to you all of those things that we've never thought to bring to you, so that you can touch them and make all things well.